All right, part two here. We just got done, foiling and distributing and stuff like that when we're multiplying. Now we're going to start solving equations, and we're going to solve them just like we would, except chances are, the times where we'd come across a no solution, now we can actually say what the solution is. And so we're going to subtract 12 from both sides. We get 3x squared equals negative 12 divided by 3. X squared equals negative 4. And then we need to square root both sides, don't we? And so x would equal, now we can split this in two. Now remember, when you square root, you have to do plus or minus, right? Anytime you square root, plus or minus. Now this divides up into the square root of 1 and square root of 4. Oh, sorry, square root of negative 1 and the square root of 4. And so here the square root of 4 is 2. And the square root of negative 1 is I. And so our answer is plus or minus 2i. Alright, same thing here. Let's subtract 1. We get 2x squared equals negative 1. And then we divide by 2. And we get x squared equals negative 1/2. Interesting, okay. And then we square root it. Anytime you square root, you need to do plus or minus. And once you kind of get the hang of this, you realize all I'm doing is kind of pulling out an I, and so we're going to have square root of negative 1, square root of 1/2. And so this turns into I, and so you get I times the square root of 1/2. Alright, now the last one here, we're going to use the quadratic formula for. Because we have a trinomial here, right? We have x squared minus x plus 2, right? And so, if you remember our quadratic formula, x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. There we go. So now we plug in the numbers where they go. So x equals, b is negative 1, so we're going to have negative 1 plus or minus the square root of negative 1 squared minus 4. A is 3, C is 2, all over 2, A is 3. Now we just work to simplify it here. This becomes a positive 1, so 1 plus or minus the square root of 1 minus 24 all over 6. Okay, we keep going. 1 plus or minus the square root of negative 23 all over 6. Okay, at this point we'd be like, uh-oh, but now we know better because we know about imaginary numbers. And so what we can do is 1 plus or minus, let's take out the square root of negative 1, right? Because negative 23 can be split into square root of negative 1. 23 is prime, and so that just kind of stays. And so we know that this is I. So we can do I times the square root of 23 all over 6. And that, my friends, is our answer, as ugly as it may look. Alright, so quadratic formula, you solve it like always, and once you get a negative, then that's when you pull out your I, and this is our answer right here. Alright, so that's 4.8.